you are Stephen Hammond of 135 Knoll Road, Bedford.
I am.
And you are the husband of April Hammond, who died in the crash of Golf Alpha Papa Mike Papa.
Yes. April Hammond was my wife.
You are at present employed by Simon Associates.
Yes.
And when did you join Simon Associates?
3 months ago.
And prior to that, where were you employed?
Icarus Properties. I worked for Mr. Cummings for 4 years.
And what was your position there?
I was Mr. Cummings' personal assistant.
Now, what was the financial state of that company before you left it?
Parlous.
It was bad.
Icarus Properties was virtually broke.
Now, how long had the company been in that financial position?
Over a year.
Yes. Now, were you able to identify the cause of this financial malaise?
Yes.
What was that?
Mr. Cummings.
In what way was Mr. Cummings responsible?
He was incompetent.
Incompetent?
He was hopeless. But he was a very good front man, a good salesman, but when it came to finance, he didn't have a clue. If one could become a property tycoon on talk, Mr. Cummings would have been a Sid Heyman several times over. Unfortunately, talk isn't enough.
No, indeed. Now, would it be true to say that at the time of his air crash, Edward Cummings was in serious financial straits?
Serious? Disastrous is more like.
Now, why do you say that?
Well, he owed money all over the place. Louis Simon was his last chance of keeping afloat.
Yes. Now, there's been much talk in this court of Mr. Cummings' turns.
Yes.
Did you ever witness one of these turns?
Several times.
Yes. Could you describe the symptoms, please?
Well, they didn't last very long.
How long?
About 15 or 20 seconds, I suppose.
And what were the symptoms?
Well, he used to go very white and kind of stiff, and, well, it's very hard to describe. It was as if he'd gone away.
Gone away?
As if he wasn't there. I mean, his body stayed where it was, but he didn't, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
He was kind of vacant.
Yes. Did you mention these attacks to Mr. Cummings?
Well, 2 or 3 times I asked him if he was all right.
And what did he say?
Well, after a bit, he used to say, yes, fine, don't worry.
Yes. Did he tell you what these attacks were?
No, sir.
Did Mr. Cummings make any mention of these attacks?
No. He just seemed embarrassed that I'd noticed them.
Yes. How many of these attacks did you see?
About a dozen, I suppose.
Were they all roughly about the same time and length?
It's very hard to say. It was just a few seconds, that was all.
Yes. Now, did they impair his ability to do business?
No, not that I could see. It was just a hiatus, a stop. Immediately afterwards, he'd go on doing whatever he'd been doing before. He'd take up the same train of thought or continue with whatever action he'd been doing.
Yes. What was your opinion of the nature of these attacks?
Well, I didn't have one.
Did you think they might be epileptic in nature?
Well, I didn't know. I don't know anything about epilepsy.
Yes. Now, Mr. Hammond, as my learned friend will no doubt remind you, you are on oath giving evidence in a court of law. You are quite certain that you saw these attacks.
Quite certain.
And they are as you have described them to us.
Yes.
Now, to your knowledge, did other people notice these attacks? I mean, people in the office?
Oh, yes. It was a kind of joke.
Yes. Did no one think these attacks strange?
Yes, but we didn't know that they were attacks. We didn't know what they were. After a bit, we didn't pay very much attention to them.
Yes, I see. Now, as regards your late wife, April Hammond, she is alleged to have been the mistress of Edward Cummings. Did you know this?
Yes. Well, not exactly no. I guessed.
Now, she's also alleged to have been Mr. Simon's mistress at the time of the crash.
Yes.
Now, were you and your wife separated?
No.
Was there a divorce pending?
No.
Did you love your wife, Mr. Hammond?
Yes, I think I must have done. Well, it's very difficult to tell now. It seems so long ago. I must have loved her. I put up with a lot.
Yes. Do you feel bitter about Mr. Cummings' relationship with your
Well,
wife?
of course I do. I mean, no man likes his wife to go off with a chancer like Cummings. But I feel more bitter about Mr. Simon. I mean, he was old enough to be her father.
Yes, indeed. Mr. Hammond, has your evidence in this court been motivated by malice?
No. No, I don't think so. I admit that I don't like Cummings. I didn't like Mr. Simon either. But April's been dead now. Seems like forever. 9 months. I'm not that obsessed by hate.
Yes. Now, Mr. Hammond, did your wife dislike flying?
Well, she wasn't very keen on it. She used to suffer from air sickness sometimes.
Were you surprised to find out she'd been killed in a plane crash?
No, not if it was a private plane.
Why a private plane?
Because only rich men own their own planes. She
This was-
admired men with money.
This was Mr. Cummings' plane.
Anyone can make a mistake.
Did you ever strike your wife, Mr. Hammond?
No. Well, maybe that was what was wrong. Maybe I ought to have done.
Now, Miss Turner has told us that Mrs. Hammond told her that you did.
April wasn't the most reliable of informants.
No. Thank you, Mr. Hammond.
Mr. Hammond, are you a saint?
No?
Or a masochist?
No?
Oh, well, you must have enjoyed playing the complacent husband.
What do you mean?
Your wife was Edward Cummings' mistress.
Yes, I've
He
said
passed
that
her on to Louis Simon.
I don't know the details.
Was Louis Simon intending to pass her on also? And to whom?
I don't know.
The plaintiff said that Mr. Simon liked them young.
So Cummings says.
Your wife was 27, a little long in the tooth, I'd have thought, for Mr. Simon's jaded palate.
Leave her alone.
Mr. Hammond, you say that you loved your wife.
Yes.
And you expect the jury to believe that you could watch her prostituting herself and that you felt no more than a saintly equanimity.
I hated what she was doing.
Yes, and you still hate it, don't you, Mr. Hammond?
I have told no lies here.
Your entire evidence was motivated by jealousy and hatred, wasn't it?
Not true.
All this nonsense about Mr. Cummings'
It's
alleged
not
fits.
nonsense. I saw them.
You didn't know that they were fits.
I knew there was something wrong.
When?
What?
When did you know that there was something wrong?
Well, I can't give you an exact
The
date.
first time that you saw Mr. Cummings have one of these alleged attacks?
No.
The second time?
No, it was just an impression
An
that
impression,
grew on
you
me.
said, but you told us before it was an office joke.
Well, so it was.
Well, we've dealt with the first two alleged attacks, Mr. Hammond. Now, at what time in the subsequent, I think you said that you witnessed about 12 attacks in all?
Something like
Yes,
that.
well, at what time in the subsequent 10 attacks did they become an office joke?
I don't know. People remarked about it, and
Yes, hearsay, my lord.
Yes.
he had these turns. I knew about them. Other people knew about them. Mrs. Simon knew about them.
In this court, Mr. Hammond, there is only you and Mrs. Simon, two witnesses with their own individual reasons for hating Mr. Cummings and wanting to see him brought down.
That's not how it is.
Where are you employed at present, Mr. Hammond?
Louis Simon Associates.
Who is the principal shareholder in that company?
Mrs. Simon.
What is your position in the company?
I'm personal assistant to the chairman.
Who is the chairman?
Mr. Lex Falkenstein.
Is Mr. Falkenstein related to Mrs. Simon?
Yes.
What is the relationship?
He's Mrs. Simon's brother.
In your opinion, is your job there secure?
I don't know.
Or does the security of your present employment depend upon the outcome of this trial?
My lord, I protest.
No further questions, my lord.
That was a most improper one.
Yes, my lord.
If I may, my lord. Mr. Hammond, my learned friend has just suggested that your present job depends on the evidence you give in this court.
Well, it's not true.
Now, let us not mince words, Mr. Hammond. Are you and Mrs. Simon in a conspiracy to discredit Mr. Cummings?
No.
Has Mrs. Simon at any time attempted to threaten or bribe you about the evidence you have given?
No, that would be unthinkable.
Yes, indeed it would, Mr. Hammond. Now, when your wife was the mistress of Mr. Cummings and then Mr. Simon, did your marriage continue normally?
Well, it depends what you mean by normal. We lived in the same house. We shared the same bed.
Is where your wife's infidelity is not a constant source of friction between
Yes,
you?
of course.
And you had rows about your associations.
Yes.
Did you ever contemplate divorce or separation?
Yes, I contemplated it.
But you never carried it out?
No.
Why not?
How can I make you understand? April was harmless. I mean, she was pretty but silly. A bit naive, I suppose. And she was a lousy liar. She didn't want to hurt me, you see. She used to tell me all kinds of stories about where she was going, and she could never remember which story she told. She was a very poor liar.
Yes, how did she meet Mr. Cummings and Mr. Simon?
Through me. Through my job. Men like that fascinated her.
Men like what?
Men with power and influence and money. The financial buccaneers. They were exciting. I'm not. They could afford to take her to places I never could. bit of the high life is all she wanted. Cummings and Simon took advantage of her. It's funny. When we got married, we decided we wouldn't have any children immediately. First, we'd get a bit of living in, we said. This was just April getting a bit of living in.
Surely she realized that she was hurting you.
Yes, and it made her very unhappy. That's how I always knew that that I didn't have to wait very long, that she'd come back to me.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Hammond.
Thank you, Mr. Hammond. You may leave the witness box.
That completes the case for the defence, my lord.
Yes, thank you. I think this would be an appropriate moment to adjourn. I will listen to pleas on behalf of the plaintiff and the defendant after a short recess.
All stand.